Welcome everyone to the HVAC 2.0 show. I'm Nate Adams, the CEO, and joined here by a few of us tonight because somebody didn't pay enough attention to the calendar. Like, oh, it's freaking Memorial Day. Oops. So happy Memorial Day, everyone. Hope you had a good day. Um, and what we're going to be talking about tonight, with some help from both Ken in Athens, Ohio, and Reedy in Pinehurst, North Carolina, and of course TK in Rochester, New York, and myself in Ohio again. So here we are. So we're going to be talking about communicating equipment, and if it is something that we need to be talking about a lot more now than perhaps we were in the past. And I don't think I'm going to shock anyone by saying, yes, we think pretty strongly that is probably the case. So we'll work through this. And this is going to go back to, let's see, I got to figure out a different way of flipping slides here. This is going to go back to last week where we talked about how regulations are likely to make our clients and their homes sick, and potentially us if we aren't careful with our own choices in our own homes, because there's a pretty good push to, well, in electrification, we're going to upsize equipment, and larger equipment has better dehumidification capabilities, right? No. And then higher SEER equipment, that doesn't hurt dehumidification. Oh, wait, yeah, that does too. So like all of these things are pushing that direction, and then like dew points are up, as trees get taller, houses get less shade, so they need more dehumidification after a few years than they do when they're built. Like there's all of these different things that are pushing us in this direction. And here we are with equipment that in general is far worse at dehumidification than the old stuff used to be. So ironically, in general, give me an old school 8 SEER, it burns a ton of juice, but that coil runs on the edge of freezing all the time. When it comes to this purpose, that's much more what I would prefer. But we can't get that anymore, except for some communicating equipment. So here's the key takeaways for tonight. Fully communicating equipment is probably required to achieve the 6 functions of HVAC, which I'll define in a moment. And hopefully you've seen this before. And that's what the whole badass HVAC or nearly perfect HVAC idea is meant to achieve. Is it perfect? No, it's called nearly perfect. But of the 6 functions, load matching and dehumidification pretty much require fully communicating equipment. So we'll walk through that. Second up, least cost cold climate heat pumps typically aren't fully communicating. So I think of like the Bosch that I have, or we talked about the Carrier MURA 38, which is basically a mini split outdoor unit with a 2-stage indoor air handler. That we looked at the sensible heat ratios on that, and they were bad, 0.95 to 1. Really not good. So that's problematic. So if you are going to offer those, cover your butt and always offer a whole house dehumidifier. In fact, if you live in a humid climate, offer a whole house dehumidifier every time. You don't need to push it. You don't need to give it a shove. Just make sure it's on the quote and make mention that this could be an issue. And it's something that we can always put in later, but maybe it's a little bit cheaper to put in now because it doesn't require an extra trip. It's not an extra truck roll. So, you might be, hey, if you choose now, it's $400 off, whatever it might be. And then the last one is if you are consistently using a communicating piece of equipment and you have a way you like to set stuff up. So I am a nerd with the Carrier Infinity, as are all of us here. There are a lot of small tweaks. It doesn't take long. It takes me like, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes to go through. If I'm just doing it myself, I can walk a client through them in 30 to 40 minutes usually. But there's a bunch of little tweaks that I make that I like how the system runs better when I make those. So if you aren't sure if your techs are going to do it, you can probably set up a USB stick, plug it in, and upload your settings. Some of the systems now will let you do that over the air as well. So those are the key takeaways. Let's look at the 6 functions. So these are in order of importance. So if you are looking for comfort, you want to be able to match loads. That is putting out exactly as much heating or cooling as the house needs at that moment, which is going to vary, day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute, season by season. That's never exactly the same. And each room is actually going to be slightly different as well. But to do that, you need to have variable output. and you want to be able to dip as low as humanly possible, and then have it sized as aggressively as possible so that you aren't oversizing it, which we'll get to in a little bit. Second up is filtration. You want to knock the garbage out of the air. That's good for the equipment. That's good for the lungs. There's a lot of benefits. Good for indoor air quality. That's just a good media filter that doesn't have bypass, and the bigger the better. Dehumidification is the other big one we're going to be talking about. To do that, you need to be able to run a really cold coil and keep that coil cold at as low of a capacity as possible for as long as possible so that you keep dehumidifying as much as possible, particularly in your shoulder seasons and partial load times, which is several months a year. That's not an insubstantial amount of time. Fresh air, bring that in from outside. We hit this ad nauseum early in the show, so that's episodes 2 through 6. So go back and look at those. Right place at the right time. It changes to mixing. Think of a house like a vinaigrette. So load matching, there's going to be a limit to what you can do because the sun's going to shine on different parts of the house, different times of the day. If you want to blunt temperature differences, the best thing you can do is to mix the air in the whole house together and blunt the differences. That's what this is. So if you can mix a house well, you can typically take 5-degree differences and knock them down to 2 or 3. So that's what this is. And that's just a good ECM and low static. And then humidification, depending on your climate, you may need to add moisture in the winter. Here in Ohio, we need to add that at least a couple weeks a year. Okay, so here's what we're actually going to dig into tonight. That's enough on the intro side. So we're going to talk about fast cars and why one is much more fun than the other, and it was not the one that I would have ever expected. Then we'll talk about load matching in communication, dehumidification in communication, and then how to help more clients buy these systems. So the two cars we're going to talk about are these two. And it's kind of a funny thing. So I grew up with my dad restoring fancy antique cars. So I got to ride in and in many cases drive some very cool cars. Most of them were not modern. Most of them were teens, 20s, and 30s. But one of my dad's buddies had a Ferrari Testarossa, and I got to drive that. So it's anybody who grew up through the 80s, that was the cool car. Everybody wanted a Testarossa. And then we had actually 2 of these 370Zs. We liked the first one so well, even after we sold it, we bought another one and then sold that one too. Oops. But may seem funny to compare these 2 cars, but if you are a car guy, as I am, maybe not as much now in middle age, but I still like cars a lot. Very similar 0 to 60s, very similar quarter miles. So it seems kind of funny, but cars have gotten a lot faster, considering this was one of the fastest cars in the world, and this is now kind of an also-ran, really, speed-wise. But what I found in driving this, now part of it was I had the owner in the passenger seat, and he was nervous, and he didn't want to have me rev the car high. But the Testarossa, until you got it to 4,000 RPM, you had to have it really singing. It didn't have any power. It was like driving a Toyota Corolla. In fact, my wife's little 1992 Toyota Corolla was faster off the line, which is kind of wild. So I was surprised how inflexible this car was, where meanwhile, this car in 6th gear would go 180, but about the same top speed here. And this car, you could put it in 6th gear at 20 miles an hour, and it would pull. So it was super flexible. This was a great car to drive just day to day. You didn't have to do anything wild. You weren't trying to keep it revved up all the time. And I was genuinely surprised how disappointed I was driving the Testarossa. Very lucky to get to drive it, but you don't expect your dream car to kind of be eh. And that was how I felt. Still beautiful. So what's the difference between them? It's variable valve timing. So if anybody here is a car guy, you'll know what this is. This is changing your timing of when the valves open so that they can breathe either early or late in the combustion cycle. And what variable valve timing lets you have is both low-end torque and high-end horsepower. So this car had both. The Ferrari only had high-end power. And it's because it didn't have variable valve timing. So that was the big difference between them that surprised me. Now, obviously, since then, Ferraris have variable valve timing. They were one of the very early adopters, but that one didn't. So the variable valve timing gives you the best of both worlds. So now let's turn this to HVAC. Variable valve timing is like fully variable or fully communicating equipment. So now you can change anything you want in the equipment, your coil temperature, your fan speed, your outdoor compressor, anything can change. But meanwhile, what this is like, the Ferrari is basically like HVAC that doesn't have communication, where the 370 is like HVAC with communication. And in particular, with what we're looking at here, the Ferrari is more like a cold climate heat pump that doesn't have communication and has bad dehumidification. So this is very similar. So it's very good at cold temperatures. That's great, because that's if you're trying to go for putting heat pumps in cold climates, you do want good output at low temperatures, although you can use strip heat for that too. We're definitely not afraid of that. Where if you have everything, you can get cold climate heat pumps with communication, and you can potentially get good dehumidification. Depends on your system selection still. So a lot of this comes down to the law of unintended consequences. That's what we're seeing. And it's funny, I was thinking about, so do I create some whole dichotomy of how you define fully communicating? I'm going to go back on Potter Stewart, who was a Supreme Court justice, when he was trying to define obscenity in a pornography case. He said, "I shall not today attempt further to define the kinds of material, but I know it when I see it." So we'll talk a little bit about what fully communicating means, because there's different varieties of communicating now. There's so many different ways. I mean, like ducted mini split. So you're talking low static, medium static, or high static. Like those didn't exist just a few years ago, and now we have those three. So next up, let's talk about load matching and communication. So obviously, this is the first one of the 6 functions, and it's the most important for delivering client comfort. So you'll notice in HVAC 101 from my book, the home comfort book, that this is how I describe it. I compare it to a car. So your car has variable output. You can go very cold, you can go very hot. And in this case, it's just mixing. You've got your refrigerant line and then your coolant line with the hot coolant in there that you can work with. But in any case, you can vary your temperature output. Meanwhile, most homes have single stage equipment, which means it's on or it's off. So that is not load matching. Another good way to look at this is usually very useful for describing to clients. You think about, you've got 10 gallons of hot water to take a shower or get clean with, and you have a choice between having the whole bucket dumped over your head in 1 second, or you can take a 5-minute shower. In either case, it's 10 gallons of hot water. Which one would you prefer? And of course, you want the shower. That's the same thing with load matching equipment. If you have an oversized single stage piece of equipment, particularly in a moderate temperature day, say 40 degrees, 50 degrees outside, something like that, if you only have 80,000 BTUs to give, that's going to be like that big bucket of water. So that's problematic when it comes to matching what the house needs.
Nate, I'll tie that into MRT, mean radiant temperature, which people in HVAC will grasp pretty readily.
Hopefully so. That's thanks to Robert Bean for teaching Ted and I that years ago, and then teaching Allison Bales that. Do you want to define that real quick for those that don't know mean radiant?
By having if you're sitting close to, I'll do it with more of an example rather than technical terms. If you're sitting close to a cold surface, be it a single pane window or an uninsulated wall, even though the room temperature may be 70 degrees, which is your target, nonetheless, your body will be losing heat towards that cold surface. And when systems are cycling off and on, we're not keeping that surface at a steady temperature. So we're going to have fluctuations, and that's where discomfort comes in.
Yep, that's a good way of putting it. So our extremities have about 150, 160,000 temperature sensors in them. We have that in all of our body, but most of them are like hands, feet, and face. So yeah, it can really mess with you if you have a cold surface.
I'll add that also relates to recovery. If you're setting back a thermostat, you may get the air temperature up, but the mass of the house is not yet back at your desired temperature. So you still don't feel comfortable, even though the thermostat says, oh, well, we should be comfortable.
Yep. Yeah, I heard somebody describe this also as like check the air temperature in the refrigerated aisle of a supermarket. So particularly like the freezer aisle, so you've got doors on it. So the air temperature may well be 70 degrees, but it doesn't feel good because the surfaces of those doors are cold and they're sucking the heat out of you. So yeah, good mean radiant is important. And to do that with air, you want to match how much heating or cooling the house needs to what it's putting out. So it's running all the time and you're constantly mixing that air and washing the surfaces with cool or heated air, whichever way it needs. So yeah, important thing to grasp. And here's what you see with oversized equipment. You see big temperature swings where the temperature goes up very quickly. And then if the house is leaky, it comes down very quickly. If it's not leaky, it'll come down slowly. But then when it turns on again, it rushes on again. And so you get these big spikes. And if you have two rooms that are different, like you have an addition that somebody scabbed in the ductwork to the existing duct system and it just doesn't get the flow that it needs, that may run 5 degrees colder and now it's feeling bad. So the thermostat may be set at 70, but that room may be running down as low as 60. So this is oftentimes what's going on. Now, if you do load matching, it's not going to make that temperature difference perfect because you may still be short on flow. You have to get the BTUs there. There's no getting around that. But in general, you're going to see much more gradual shifts in the air temperature and the surface temperatures. And that's what you want. And to your point, Ken, this is what Robert Brearley says. And he defines mean radiant temperature as it's get your surface temperatures, all of them. So every surface in the house, get them to within 2 to 3 degrees of what the thermostat says. And if you run a blower door and an infrared camera, you're going to find your weaknesses. And even if you just run an infrared camera in the house as it stands on a hot or a cold day, you'll see surfaces that are definitely not within 2 to 3 degrees. Yeah. And so variable speed will help make it closer to that. But if the shell's screwed up, the shell's still screwed up. If you need insulation and air sealing, there's a limit to what you can fix with HVAC. You can blunt things, but you can't solve. And this is probably a little bit on the small side. Should have blown this up bigger. But this is from the sizing chapter of my book. So picture a house. This is kind of what I picture in Cleveland. So a 2,000 square foot house with a decent shell has about a 3-ton heat load and a 2-ton cooling load, somewhere in that ballpark. So that's what I was basing the numbers on. If you have an 80,000 BTU furnace in that house and a 3-ton air conditioner, which is one of the most common setups that I see, and Ken, I see you nodding your head. You see plenty of those a little bit south, like super common match.
The supply house said, "Oh, that's all we need to stock."
It's not that far from the truth, man. Well, if you put a gun to my head, I'm going to say a 60K mod with a 3-ton communicating on top, because that'll cover a lot of houses. Yep. But if you think about a 3-ton load and you have an 80,000 BTU output, what percentage of the year does that system match?
1%.
Well, not even that, because it's too oversized for that. You aren't even hitting design. So in theory, if you look at a 3-ton single stage, and let's imagine that it actually puts out 36,000 at design, which most of them aren't, but in theory, that would match your load 1% of the year, because that 3-ton is still too big for your cooling. So it's never going to match that. So it's 1% of the year. Great. You can match 87 hours a year. Good job. Now let's make that 3-ton a 2-stage. Now that can actually help quite a bit. That can get us as much as 30% up. So we're getting there. And then let's take that same 3-ton and make it a 25% fully modulating, fully communicating heat pump. And that can get us to about 50% of the year. We can match the output of that equipment to what the house needs from moment to moment. So even a well-matched piece of equipment is still missing about half the year, because it'll only dial down to 9,000 BTUs. And a significant portion of the year, even in Cleveland, your heat load on a house like this is below 9,000 BTUs, or cooling load, about half the year. So then let's go crazy, and it's got a 3-ton heat load. Let's put a 2-ton heat pump in. I mean, that's crazy town right there. And then you make up with resistance, and even that only gets you to about 2/3 of the year. So if you think that putting in like a 5-ton variable speed heat pump will save you, you're going to have some struggles. So maybe you'll probably improve comfort versus what they were used to if you don't burn up the motor, because you're running high static and all these things. But variable speed will not save you. It helps, but it won't save you. So don't lean on it too crazy hard. And if you want to dig in more to this, the Home Comfort book, NateTheHouseWhisperer.com, a bunch of it is free there. There's only 2 chapters that you have to buy. Now, let's talk about what is required for load matching. So for starters, more than 2 stages. So we will need to be talking about modulating equipment, which in my mind starts at 3 stages. I mean, oftentimes you're talking hundreds at this point. You need to be able to turn down to 25% or less of full capacity on the compressor, I should say here. And the fan speed needs to turn down to a similar capacity as well. This is what will kill you on a lot of this equipment. This is what's kicking my butt on the Bosch. The fan just can't get low enough. It's not running the coil cold enough. And if you look at the sensible heat ratios, you're going to see lots of 0.9s and 1s when you start looking at a lot of this equipment under, fairly normal operating conditions where you're, maintaining 70, 75 indoor, and you don't have super high dew points inside. They're just not doing any dehumidification under most conditions. So if you can't turn down your fan speed, it's going to kill you. And also to do this, you may need a smaller indoor coil and air handler to get to that lower fan speed and colder coil temperature. Guess what the IRA rebates require? Larger coils to hit those higher SEERs. See any problems?
So I was surprised how many 3-ton heat pumps would match with a 2-ton air handler from manufacturer's specs. It may not meet IRA, but you can do that. So you got to look at the specs.
We initially were running the larger coils, so we'd run like the 3.5-ton or 4-ton coil with the 3-ton heat pump, and you could do okay. There was one that I watched. It was a green speed, and it messed with my mind. The client liked warmer indoor temperatures, so it was 80 degrees inside and 80 degrees outside. So there was basically no sensible load. There was some solar load, but basically no sensible. I'm like, so John, turn that down to like 72 and let's see what happens. And it never ramped because it was running that coil icy and at the lowest possible output that it could. And this is before we figured out reheat on that system. And I'll be darned if it didn't march relative humidity down slightly faster than temperature, which is impressive to be able to do that. So some of these systems can do pretty well with, and that was with a larger coil, but still be careful. As a blanket recommendation, I would not suggest doing that. But let's talk about dehumidification and communication here. So that's the third. And I have filtration ahead in importance because like this is good for your equipment and good for the air and a bunch of other things. And it's easy peasy. I mean, come on, it's a decent media filter, people. This is not a hard thing. Just don't have bypass on a good filter and make it as big as you can. So that's easy. But dehumidification, when it comes to good indoor air quality and keeping a house healthy, this is utterly critical. There's nothing more important than this in our experience, in a humid climate anyway. And last week, we talked about potential dehumidification solutions, and one of them was communicating equipment. This is a crummy thing I scabbed together from Carrier, where communicating, we're defining it to a degree at least as all 3 pieces of equipment talk to each other and know what's going on and make minute adjustments based on what's going on. But again, it's not a cure-all. And the issue is you get a lot of this modern equipment that if it's oversized and it's high SEER, it needs to run for quite a while before the coil gets cold enough, if it ever gets cold enough with the higher SEERs, to even begin dehumidifying. So you may be looking at this 0.99 sensible heat ratio, where, I mean, technically there's always some dehumidification going on, but I mean, it could be a flutter at the top. You're talking tens or hundreds of BTUs, definitely not thousands. So that's a real challenge. So this is a big concern that we should all have, and cover your butt on this, because people are still going to buy this stuff, and let them put it in, but make sure that they signed off that they knew what was going on. Responsibly avoid responsibility. So here's the quick version that we talked about last week. So beer can cold. I'm going to pull this whole concept over, and now we're not holding the lines on the outside to see if they're cold, to see if the system's working after you start up a new air conditioner. Now we're going to talk about the air conditioning coils getting cold enough to collect condensation, which is what a beer can does. You know, when they get cold, you get condensation on them if there's any humidity in the air. And again, until the system's running for 5 or 15 minutes, you're generally not going to get the coil cold enough to start dehumidifying. And both oversized and high efficiency HVAC may never get there. So that's the problem. That's the 0.99 we were looking at. And this is the real risk, is that over time, poorly dehumidified homes get wet. And in time after that, people will get sick. These are oftentimes not instantaneous. This is like a 2 to 5 year lag oftentimes, or it could be longer. So like our house in West Virginia, oh man, has that thing gotten wet. It has not been well cared for. Like we had the sister, like 6 joists underneath, and the 6 more had already been done. A bunch of them we were already doing. Like they were sistered on one side, and now we sistered them on the other. Like that house has not been well cared for from a moisture perspective. We may just have to rip it down at some point. So like that is what happens to a house that doesn't get dry enough, and particularly with modern building materials. So this is coming. Sick building syndrome is going to make a comeback. Like people are like, oh, you're being scare tactics. Like, no, I'm looking at the science and I'm saying this is coming. I don't know when, I don't know how often, but it's coming. So be aware. And just to repeat last year, and actually I need to put this over on Facebook where you can make it so we can see your name, but 15 minutes at least for runtime for a wet enough coil for dehumidification. So there you go. I said 5 because Stephen Reardon the other day posted a measure quick video of a Bosch, and it actually got into dehumidification relatively quickly, faster than I expected. So it was interesting to just watch it. Now we can watch this stuff, get probes and use measure quick, learn stuff. So here we are looking at the Carrier 38 Mura like we did last week. So this is a high efficiency heat pump that is non-communicating. These are fairly standard indoor conditions. So 77 degrees indoor temperature and 60.8 wet bulb. So let's call that high 50s on the dew point side, which is still a little higher than it should be. I mean, ideally you want to stay under 55. I mean, if you can, under 50. We're nowhere close to those. And look at this, we're already pushing a 1 sensible heat ratio. So this is risky. Even 0.83 is kind of meh, because this still isn't that humid. So this is not adequate dehumidification. If you run this system, you're going to need separate dehumidification, whatever that looks like. Could be whole home, could be a $250 Home Depot, whatever. Meanwhile, this is a Daikin Fit, which is what we put in 2 of our houses in West Virginia, the 2 Airbnbs that we did. And you can see there's a 0.75 sensible heat ratio at similar conditions. These aren't identical, but it's as close as I could get to between these 2 spec sheets. So it's 0.75 versus 0.95, and maybe I'm sandbagging them a little bit, but you can see the general idea that we're running too high on the system, and there may or may not be a way to fix that.
Especially if they leave it on factory high-speed cooling fan.
That never happens, Ken.
No, of course
you
not.
never walked into a system and turned it on and you hear like the ductwork oil can, thump, thump. Yeah. And you go check it, you're like, nobody touched the dips on this thing. It's a 4-ton airflow on a 2.5-ton system. What's going on?
Yeah. Now the installers were in a hurry to finish that day.
Yes, they were, or they didn't know.
Yeah.
So I stole this same graphic and I didn't change anything in here. So this is illustrative, okay? Just trying to illustrate a point. I'm making the numbers up. But this is an idea of what you might be looking at. So this is dehumidification and being able to match when that house needs dehumidification during the year. If you have an oversized high SEER piece of equipment, it's never going to dehumidify. Repeat after me. You're going to be in trouble. So you better have offered a dehumidifier to that client, or they're likely to come back on you in one way or another. Maybe you can dodge the bullet, maybe you can't. But sooner or later, that's going to be a problem. And maybe you'll get away with it for a couple of years. I don't know. But it's
avoid the problem up front.
Yeah, offer up front. So let's say we run a 15 SEER. So that is now the requirements, or it's 14.2 SEER 2. I'm just not ready to switch over yet. Oversized 15 SEER, maybe you can match a couple percent of what the dehumidification needs of that house are, but probably not much. If we move to a right size communicating system, maybe we get to a third, something like that. If you undersize it, so you're being aggressive, say you have a 2.5 ton load, a cooling load, and you put in a 2 ton, you can probably get to like half of what that is. And why can't you do more than that? Because for a big chunk of the year, we have some dehumidification and latent load, but we don't have any sensible work to do. So the air conditioner doesn't fire. So I don't care how good your air conditioner is. So, yeah, is what it is. And that is where people are like, why do you have this obsession with reheat? Because it can help us capture a chunk of this. So now when it's like 65 to 75 degrees out, we can actually keep the house dry.
And because it's cheap.
What's that?
It's cheap to use and it works.
Yeah. And you don't have to buy a separate piece of equipment to do it. The problem is, note that I specified reheat for cooling. Reheat for heating doesn't exist in residential right now, to my knowledge. So I don't know how to do that, but I could see it being programmed. You're just going to flip it flat out between heating and cooling in that case. I mean, which is what a heat pump does all the time anyway. I mean, when it goes into frost, what's it doing? Going into cooling mode? Like, it's the same thing. Now, can you get it to run long enough? That'll use a little more juice. But again, we're talking shoulders. So if it uses 50 cents a day extra, does anyone care? Cost you $20 a month. Kept your house dry. That would be nice. So I did talk to the one of the Daikin, actually two of the Daikin engineers at AHR, and they thought I was crazy, but I'll try and send this to them and maybe it'll make sense. Man, this is where I wish Facebook user. Currently impossible by factory design, but imagine if we could do it. To me, it strikes me as a sequencing problem, not an equipment problem. It's just a different way of doing defrost. Maybe I'm wrong. So somebody tell me if I'm wrong. But anyway, if you aren't looking at communicating equipment, being able to do good dehumidification along with the high SEER that is now required, we're cruising for a bruising. Jim Kohler talked last week about how he moved to Florida and his house seldom gets below 60% relative humidity in a brand new house in Florida with high efficiency air conditioning, high SEER, bad dehumidification. Like it's a train wreck that is so obvious to see that it's coming. If you're just paying a little bit of attention, it's coming. So make sure you're offering dehumidifiers. Now, what do you need for dehumidification? You need to ride that coil on the very edge of freezing. It needs to be as close to a block of ice as you can possibly get it to without turning it into a block of ice and getting a callback on that. And really, you want to do that, but you want to run it at low output to extend run times. You want it doing that at 6 or 10 or 12,000 BTUs, not at 36. Because if you run 3 tons of cooling it's going to satisfy the thermostat quickly, and it's going to shut off, and then it won't run long enough to actually get that cold. So it needs to be able to turn down as low as possible. You need to be able to vary the air handler fan speed, and the air handler needs to get to low flow, 300 CFM or less. A lot of air handlers won't do this. I have yet to see it in anyone's specification sheets. I've looked. Has anybody seen the bottom end?
Not
Carrier
published.
can go down to 285 before it faults.
Okay, well, but does it show that in the manual, or do you have to watch it run?
No, you can. It's in the technical manual, the service manual.
Okay, well, it is in one of them. I asked on
Not
the Daikin Fit.
Not anything else. You have to dig around to find that.
Yeah, it's not an easy number to find. The Daikin Fit,
No.
I basically just went for a flyer and bought one, and it goes to 234. So I was happy to find that, because a 1.5 ton, I didn't want much flow on the bottom end. And those little buggers are little sponges. It's an impressive little piece of equipment. I've been pleasantly surprised, and I'm a pain in the butt on this. So to be happy with something, it's nice. And you need to be able to vary outdoor compressor speed. There's a bunch of stuff out there that will do that, but it's the fan speed and the coil temperature you need to be able to vary. And to really do this well, you probably need to reheat. I don't know how else to do it. How do you deal with your low sensible, high latent conditions? You need to reheat. I don't know how else you get around that. Whatever that looks like. And there you go. You can go back. This is episode 6, reheat dehumidification. So hopefully this ties it together a little bit, and maybe I hammered this thing too hard, this difference between them. But when I drove this car, like it really just stuck in my mind how annoying it was that it didn't do anything until 4,000 RPM, and I was with an owner that didn't want me to rev it up. So Ted told me he got to drive one with an owner who said, okay, so I got to teach you how to drive this, keep the tack high, and run the car hard. That's how they want to be run. So they can absolutely be driven well, but the way that I got to drive it, it was not a satisfying experience. And it just really made me think about communicating equipment and variable valve timing. Now, how do we help more people buy these things? So again, this is never about selling. It's merely about offering and making people aware, and then letting them choose. So this is offer and decline, educate and offer options. It's what you're doing again and again. So you are trying to responsibly avoid responsibility through all of this. And another way to think of this is being the guide, not the hero. And I know Ken and Reedy, you're very used to doing this thing. You're just helping show them things, but they are Luke, you are Obi-Wan. Never be Luke. If you are the hero, that makes them either the villain or the victim. Do you want them to be either one? No. In every story, you've got the villain, the victim, the hero, and the guide. The only place you want to be is the guide, or you'll get bit at some point. Ask me how I know. So in the process, you start with the comfort quiz. And I mean, you can do this in whatever way you want, but this is how it works within HVAC 2.0. And finally, it's going to be ready here very shortly. Thank goodness. Are there comfort problems to solve? There's 4 questions you ask people. Do you have rooms that don't heat well? Do you have rooms that don't cool well? Does anybody have respiratory issues? And are there water problems in the house? And it's ranked on a scale of 0 to 10. If they don't have much, you do a free quote. If they do have some issues, you do a comfort consult. And even in a free quote, you're going to tell them about the 6 functions. And actually, let's see if we can get this thing to, I don't know if this will play or not. No, it won't. I'll put a link to this in the video once it's uploaded. This is 6 things every HVAC system should do. So this is the 6 functions of HVAC. And it's really simple. You compare what a car HVAC system does to what a home HVAC system does. Everyone intuitively knows how a car HVAC system works. You've got variable output, that's your heating and cooling. You have variable fan speed. You have dehumidification, looks like the air conditioner button. You have mixing, you can send it wherever you want in the car. You have outdoor air. The only thing it doesn't do is humidification. So cars actually have remarkably good HVAC systems. And this goes back to anything that has air conditioning. So like since the early 90s, every car can do 5 of the 6 functions. Most houses can't do any, not well. And so if you give that 4-minute video to some clients and you help them understand what's going on about the 6 functions, now they're beginning to ask questions about, well, how do I get those? And that's where the free quote offer, look at it, load matching, dehumidification, mixing, filtration, fresh air, humidification. Those sound familiar? And here's the different levels of systems. Sure, I'll sell you that basic system. The chuck in a truck will sell you for $6,000 or whatever it might be. But you're not going to get load matching. Your dehumidification is mediocre. You're not getting mixing. You're not getting filtration. You're not getting fresh air, and you're definitely not getting humidification. I'll sell it to you, but understand that you're giving these things up. If you're okay with that, if you're just looking for low bid, you're going to sell the house or it's a rental or whatever, maybe that's what you choose. But in general, when people understand what they're getting here, they're much less likely to take the bottom option. In this case, I loaded in an IRA option, which has very bad dehumidification. It's like, look, I'll sell it to you, but I'm also going to offer you a dehumidifier and you don't have to buy it now, but you're probably going to buy it later. Or whatever that looks like. Or we can do, a better system still. So this is, if people just understand what the differences are. When I first got into this world, I didn't know the difference between a furnace and a boiler. I mean, I've come a long way with no formal education in particular, aside from doing stupid things with client houses and seeing what works and what doesn't. This is really the way to go. You're just showing them what their potential options are. And there you are. I mentioned one way to offer the cheap end of IRA equipment. This is what it actually looks like for now. We aren't aiming for pretty in what we're building right now. We are aiming for functional, because if it looks pretty but it doesn't work, it's kind of dumb. If we can make it work really well, we can then make it pretty. So that's how we're coming at this problem. But you can see what goes on. These are their equipment choices. So 15 SEER, 16, 18, 21, whatever. This is the equipment side. And then these are the install pieces. So on your cheap system, you're going to keep your 1-inch basic filter, nothing exotic. On what we think should be offered as a basic system, like the lowest one that you want to sell would be a 4-inch media filter. So at least you get that filtration because it's easy to get. And then you can move to higher MERVs or whatever you want to do above that. But this is what the installs look like. So if you show them, like if you want a crap system with a crap install, okay, we can do it. Sure, I'll take your money. But understand that's what you're getting. Well, I don't really want that. Okay, well, that's fine. So which one, what works best for you and your needs? And it's amazing how often people choose better when they're offered better options. And I've touched on this before, but this is badass HVAC. So these are the 6 functions in one system. So load matching is a nice right size variable speed communicating heat pump. Filtration is a good media filter in a large return trunk or drop, whatever you want to call it. Dehumidification oftentimes requires that reheat. Fresh air, you bring in a damper from outside. Which one did I leave 4 out? Oh, no. I left 6 out. So mixing is just plenty of room and low static so that your ECM doesn't burn much. And then the last one is humidification. So I added that to this later. And this is what one looks like in practice. So we put a bunch of these in. And so this is in the basement of a house in Akron, Ohio. So this is not an exotic install. Like it's not a really hard thing to get done. And then after the comfort consults, the second question that you want to answer is HVAC alone likely to solve the problems the client wants to solve? A surprising amount of the time, it is adequate, or it's enough to blunt the problems. So you put in a right size variable speed, nicely installed piece of equipment, and they live happily ever after. And if that isn't enough, we've got a process for that as well, that you can get into the deeper retrofits, which is how the House Whisperer moniker came about for me. And through all of this, gents, Sound familiar? I think all of us have done this.
Yep.
So through all of this, what we're really trying to do is to help you learn the easy way and not the hard way. If you want to go learn the hard way, okay. All of us here have learned the hard way, and all of us are going to learn the hard way on various things, but we can help accelerate that process. And so there we go. That's what we're covering for tonight. So one fast car is more fun, load matching, dehumidification and communication, and then how to help more clients buy these systems. I joke, friends don't let friends buy single stage. If you understand what's involved, you'll never want one. I mean, at least get a 2-stage, but 2 stages are kind of pieces of crap too. So now we're in communicating in full variable. So very quickly you ramp yourself up, and particularly with the Daikin Fit being out now, that's a pretty reasonably priced communicating system. So I've been pleased with that, where the carrier green speed keeps heading further and further into nosebleed pricing territory, which is painful. And here's the takeaways. Hopefully these make more sense now. Fully communicating equipment's probably required to achieve the 6 functions of HVAC. So you saw the bands, like if we're going to match the heating and cooling needs throughout the entire year, you kind of have to have variable speed communicating with really low turndowns. And then if you want to be able to match the dehumidification needs as much of the year as possible, you really need to have variable speed equipment that's communicating. So you got to be able to get that fan speed low so you can get that coil nice and cold, even at low compressor outputs. And then the last one is, we didn't really dive into it or anything, but consider setting up a USB stick with settings if there's a piece of equipment that you sell a lot.
Saves a lot of time.
What's that?
It saves quite a bit of time, and even on such things as just entering your company information instead of having to use one finger to put in a web address and a phone number and your landline. Set it up on a stick. Yep.
So hopefully those are some helpful pieces, but I mean, that's where we are on what we've got here is a failure to communicate. Yeah, we definitely need to. So we're getting close enough that I at least want to make people aware of pricing for the 2.0 system moving forward. So there's 2 tiers at the moment. So basic it's free for 3 months, so you can just try it out. And then it's $6 a month. It's basically just cover some data fee, and we don't want to have a bunch of just junk hanging around in the system. You can enter as much data as you want. Free quote reports there are $10 each, and we'll go over what those look like soon. Comfort consult reports are $25 each. Again, we'll probably just spend an episode on each one of these. Report access, you get 90 days. And this, when you do the reports, everyone here already knows you pop off a report and you're like, oh, I don't like that. And you go and you make modifications, you go in and you pop it off again. So you do a couple of iterations over 5 or 10 minutes and you get it to where you want. And then you PDF it and send it to the client. Or actually there's semi-automated emails that are in the system, but not great yet, that will work in a little while. And so it'll be easy to just email. There will be a basic support group. We kind of have that in Facebook, but we've got one in Kajabi as well, which is the onboarding platform. But the advanced support group you don't get. Meanwhile, at $200 a month, you get all this stuff unlimited, and you get the advanced support group. Remote and on-site help and training are available. So, but this is just the software here. But here's the deal. If you don't get $2,000 more for one system, I don't know what the heck's wrong with you in a month.
Wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, you're doing something wrong. And so that one upsell should be enough to pay for the system for a year. So is this pricing going to stay the same? I have no idea, to be frank. But this is where it is for now. So
yeah, our guys are mostly seeing double the revenue with the same number of leads.
Yep.
What you want to do, though, before you start running leads with either the free quote or the comfort consult, is you really want to do 2 practice runs.
Yep.
And for some companies, you're going to need to do practice runs for the CSR, and or maybe your tech guy, maybe your
Sometimes
sales
the owner.
manager. I mean, there are people you should be doing showing this to anyway. So it's not like they're not good to practice on. And you certainly don't want to be getting stuck with something that you're not familiar with in front of a client. Particularly if it's a comfort consult, because comfort consults run properly have like an 80% closing ratio with an average job size of around $20,000. So it's really worth it to practice the comfort consult once or twice so that you don't blow an easy sale, an easy big sale.
Yeah.
But so also in the account, you're going to have Testy McTest face. Will you talk a little bit about that, Nate?
Yeah, it's funny. I just should go look for one real quick.
Okay, so Testy McTest face report in the Comfort Consult already exists, and it sort of helps you understand what a Comfort Consult, a generic Comfort Consult looks like. And we're going to have to build one for the free quote. So it's not there yet. But eventually it'll be in there and you can refer to it as you're building your first few. And then after you've built a few, you'll have plenty to refer back to.
Here we go. You can see what it looks like. So these are the Comfort Consult reports as they stand at the moment. Again, these are up for a redo in the not too distant future as well. And the on-site that you do with people fills out basically the first half of the report, and then you have to fill out the second half, which is sizing and recommendations and things like that. But you put in where their goals are and what they're trying to achieve, and then how important it is. So these 1 to 10, 0 to 10 questions, you're going to see them again and again throughout the system. And so if there's more than the 3 that are charted, they get put on here. You do a blower door test, so you help them understand how leaky or tight the house is. And if it's leaky, it can be hard to, you're not going to fix it well with just HVAC. You can make things better, but you're not going to fix it well. And what I was picturing in this, I was writing this for something that's pretty standard. I think of a 1985, 2,500 square foot tract home that's kind of leaky, but not hideous, kind of well insulated, but not that great. And the second floor is a lot warmer than the first in the summertime. Like, this should all sound really standard if you're in a place that has a lot of 2-story homes, just kind of where they are. Had a couple of rooms that are sort of leaky, beyond 10%. So nothing exotic, but something. So like the master bedroom, you might not be able to fix without doing some shell work or getting a duct there. You help understand if their house is a pig or not. We pulled this from a Department of Energy thing. So all these things are in here. Equipment sizing, you help them understand your current equipment is gigantic. So you have 72,000 output. So I was thinking of an 80K furnace that had a 72 output. And the heating was actually closer to 3 tons in this case. And you make a couple of changes up to the shell and you can get it down close to 2 tons. And we've seen this sort of thing. But anyway, this gives you an idea of what the reports look like. And this helps create some really good conversations. Like, you help them understand what are their odds of success. So we can just change your HVAC single stage, but the odds of you actually fixing anything you care about are very low. I'll take your money, but I want you to know that it's unlikely to change anything. If we put in good equipment, we've got pretty good odds of making things better. And if we do more planning, the comprehensive planning process, and then HVAC and air sealing, we've got very high odds of success. So these are the sorts of things that are in here. And you just help people understand what's going on. And then they have cogent and coherent paths forward. And people tend to really appreciate these, and they tend to buy. And again, is there any coercion? Has anyone here ever coerced a client using the system?
Nope. And
it's funny, I would say that I haven't either, but I did because as an independent consultant, if they didn't buy a comprehensive planning process so that I got paid for project management, I didn't make money.
Yeah.
So that was a bad setup. But hopefully you've heard Ted and I both say this before. Whenever we screwed up, we sold HVAC. Like every time somebody bought a new system, like, man, this is a system that should really be for HVAC contractors because you don't have to feel bad. Like
It made the pivot to HVAC contractors really quite easy.
Yeah. Yeah. But the tough part was, how do we integrate it without turning companies into dumpster fires? Because in general, building science is a great way to turn a company into dumpster fire. You get hyper focused on having science projects and on minutia that doesn't matter, and you start paying attention to a bunch of things that really don't make your business better. So the hard part through all of this is, how do we maintain the good solutions that are physics, building science based, but we're still helping clients and actually selling things and making money so that we can grow companies. It's our CTO says that losing money isn't sustainable. Talking about like the whole sustainability movement. There's a whole lot of ways to go out of business with building science alone. So we were trying to figure out a path that's repeatable for HVAC contractors that doesn't put you out of business and actually makes your company a lot better.
The slogan I like is, we're losing money on every job, but we make it up in volume.
That's about it.
Yeah.
That's about it. So there we are. I'm curious, for the people that are still watching, hit this next one. Did this move any thinking? Do you have any comments on? Do you feel more like communication is really is now a requirement for good dehumidification and load matching? Does that hit? Is that the more that we have dug into this and done data logging and tried to understand what's going on, this is what we're seeing. Got to change layouts here.
How about this phrase? Communicating equipment is the iPhone of HVAC.
There we go. But I want an Android, Ken.
Well, okay.
I like that. It's a Tesla of HVAC.
You can have that. Yeah.
Yep. Do you want the flip phone? Or do you want the smartphone?
Ah, yes.
That's
How many remember their bag phones?
Had one.
Yep.
My Thunderbird had one. My parents got it when I was a kid.
Yep. And the chicks all thought we were cool.
You know what? I rebuilt the engine on that Thunderbird and it blew up in the middle of Pennsylvania and I didn't have a signal. The bag phone worked. My cell phone didn't. My little pocket phone didn't. So if it wasn't for the bag phone, I wouldn't have been able to call a tow truck. So sometimes old equipment does have its purpose. But yeah, there we go. And Neil, I'm glad you're watching, man. Neil Comparetto, man, it's the first script that came out for the Comfort Consult. I had to throw together quickly for him because he sold one. Like, oh crap, I got to go write the script. So that was a Google Doc that started all of it. So thanks, Neil.
Neil, the first guinea pig.
He was, and the second unicorn. It's like the first unicorn that figured out how to sell besides Ted, like some of these crazy projects. And we're like, I wonder if this is teachable. And then Neil sold a couple of them and then switched companies before they executed. Oh, well, stuff happens. But anyway, smart.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what he means. Yeah. They just want
yeah.
smart. So smartphone, however you want to describe it, however you get it sold, that's great. Cam, thanks for coming.
Hey, Cameron.
So another fellow who's been helpful through all of this.
Early founder and supporter.
Yep. And longtime friend. And there we are, Neil, always looking to learn. Me too, brother. Me too. And actually, on that, one good thing to end with, when it comes to the nerdiness and the science projects, be very careful doing it for clients because it can just suck a lot of your time and be unpaid. But on your own home, put some data loggers in and just see what happens. Learn how to operate your house differently and try different things. Like I personally really like trying to understand what are the edges of a spectrum. So what's the 0, what's the 10 look like? So let's take a system and run it full efficiency. Let's take a system and run it full on like comfort and see what happens. Let's see where the edges of that system's capabilities are and see what we learn. So there's always different ways to do that sort of thing. But ideally do it on your own home so that you aren't getting a bunch of phone calls from clients. I've got an email right now from a client that I've helped remotely who's now like, hey, this IAQ monitor you suggested I buy, it's reading really high for CO2. And I'm like, I don't work for a manufacturer. You're going to have to talk to their company and figure out why it's not calibrating right. But you'll learn the ins and outs of things. So learning on your house is a wonderful way to play. In fact, Neil, thank you. You've done a couple of wonderful videos. That one that you did a couple of years ago showing about how your house in Virginia is indeed 1,000 square feet per ton for heating. And then you put in a 1.5 ton Mitsubishi in your house. So that was fun. And you're like, hey, is it going to work? And I'm like, I saw the video, Neil. It's going to work. You're going to be fine. You didn't even hook up the strips. So I love it. You gave the cliffhanger and I'm like, I'm not worried. Besides, worst case, it slides 2 degrees and it catches up by 11 in the morning the next day. Yes, indeed.
Mm-hmm.
And Ryan, yeah, smart. Honestly, that's a good thing to think about. Although smart is almost getting old. My grandpa was in marketing through the 60s, so like Mad Men era, and he wanted to put easy into everything. Like it has to be easy. And I think smart, we're kind of getting to that point with it, but whatever it takes, let's play around with wording and see what works. But the 6 functions helping people understand what equipment. A different Neil C? I'll be darned. Okay.
Well, okay.
All right. Well, I assume that would be Comparetto. And you know what happens when you assume? At least it made one out of me. Such is life. All right. Well, hopefully that was helpful, everyone. And I think we'll call it a night. Ken, Ted, you got anything else?
No. Nice job. Thanks for showing up, everyone.
Indeed. Thanks for coming, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Good night.